All right, guys, welcome back. Let's move right along. We're now on lesson 2 of Rome, and we're going to look at the fall of Rome. We're going to look at several factors. We're going to look at internal and external factors in the fall of Rome. Well, first of all, let's remember our big idea for the unit, and the big idea is the influence of an empire often lives on even after that empire falls or declines. And for this lesson, I want you to focus in on one essential question. The essential question I want you to focus in on for this is, what internal and external factors lead to the downfall of empires? Now let's get started. From our last podcast, it seemed like Rome was doing really well, and they were. They'd reached their height. They'd gone through Pax Romana, and everything seemed great. They were this big empire that seemed to be influencing other people. But it wasn't without its problems. Because Rome became so large, it became hard to govern. Rome had, first of all, new trouble finding wealth. They weren't conquering more people and bringing more money into the empire, so they couldn't pay for things necessarily. One of those things being the army. And what they had to do to help pay for the army was raise taxes, which didn't really make people all that happy to have to pay taxes. It never usually does. And second, having problems raising money through taxes for the army, it became difficult for them to pay the army good wages or even get new equipment or food or things like that, which then made the army, the people in the army, upset. And if you don't have an army to help defend you, especially if you're that large, that is a problem. Also, farming became a problem. Again, a vast empire needs to be fed. And some of the practices they used to farm didn't really suit themselves very well. First of all, a lot of the farmland was being destroyed by constant wars and battles going on. They also used a lot of slave labor. So instead of developing new practices, they just used slaves to do it, which didn't really help them develop new ways of maybe crop rotations or different tools to use to help harvest. It was more just put on the burden of enslaved people. They also hired out people from neighboring tribes and kingdoms to come into the Roman Empire and do farming for them. Well, this became a problem because a lot of those people from the other tribes that came in stayed loyal to their own tribes and eventually brought more of their tribes into the Roman Empire. We're going to find out those tribes were fighting against the Roman Empire and eventually would elect officials. They're not really elect officials. They would just follow their own rules of their own tribes and ignore the Roman laws and rules. Other internal factors that led to the downfall of Rome, there was disease was sweeping through the empire. That was partly just diseases that come, if you probably notice when you get back to school, everybody gets colds or the flu or things like that. There's a natural progression of diseases through people that are living in cities or living together, but also because of their poor farming habits and lack of food in places, general overall health of some of the citizens just was not good. Also, the government, again, was becoming corrupt. They weren't really working for the people. As I said before, raising taxes didn't make anybody happy, not having enough money to pay for the army, a lack of communication, lack of education also contributed to the fall of Rome. People just generally weren't educated. And without that education, they didn't know the issues at hand, like farming and taxes and how to deal with all of those things. And along with those internal factors, we're starting to see an increase of external factors. Mainly, Rome was under constant attack by surrounding areas. We'll get to that in a bit, but let's talk about an emperor named Diocletian. Diocletian had a great idea about governing Rome. Since it had grown so large and become hard to govern, he split the empire in two. I like to remember Diocletian's name because he divided, Diocletian, divided the empire into two. He split it into an eastern and western portion. He made himself the emperor of the eastern portion of the Roman Empire, which we will talk about in the next podcast, and then he appointed a co-emperor in the West. All right, let's get back to the fighting. Rome was under attack by lots of people, from Germanic barbarians in the West to Huns in the East. Some of these groups included the Saxons, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Huns, and the Franks. The majority of the attacks occurred in the western half of the empire. Powerful leaders like Frankish King Clovis, who we'll learn more about in units to come, attacking in the west in Gaul, and Attila the Hun raiding lands in the east helped cause the final fall of Rome in the west. A man named Odoacer brought the final end of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. He became the first barbarian king of Rome by overthrowing Roman forces. Well, that's it for this podcast. Remember that essential question. Think about what internal and external factors lead to the downfall of empires, and we'll see you in the next one.